Hey, welcome to A Director's Take. Today I'm going to take a look at On a Wing and a Prayer and give you a review of it. Okay, it's not an ordinary review. It's actually going to be something unique because I'm going to give you a director's perspective on what's going on in the show. Let's get started. On a Wing and a Prayer is directed by Sean McNamara. And Sean has done something very interesting. He has taken a story that is incredibly powerful and he's tried to add to it to make it even bigger. Well, here's something interesting. It didn't need to be bigger. The story was absolutely incredible. As a matter of fact, some people online have talked about the fact that there are certain sites you can go to where you can actually listen to the actual radio recordings from that nightmare. In the very beginning, we need to know what the genre is. Your opening scene tells us everything we need to know. Now, it's listed as a drama. Some places listed also as a mystery and a thriller. Certainly, I can understand the thriller part because here's this family in this small plane that the dad, the passenger, has to take over because the pilot got a heart attack. On top of it, the director added in more and more things to try and make it even more impactful. But in reality, here's the thing. In reality, the story is an inward story. You see, Doug White was the man in real life, and he had just experienced the death of his brother. He had to deal with a lot of things going on inside of him. He had to work through his struggles. He was at the point where he felt like he had lost his faith. That's a pretty intense thing, to be a person of faith and suddenly you're not. Yeah, that's a big change. So on top of that, having his entire family's life at stake in an airplane that's going down, you got a double whammy for a production. An incredible story. You don't need to add to it. Not at all. What you need to do as a director is explore that story, what it was like for him, what he was going through. Now, in all reality, the real Doug White, I would probably call him more of a stoic type person, a person that just doesn't really show that much emotion as he's thinking through the process of things. Dennis Quaid, on the other hand, decided to play the character much broader than that, with a lot more emotions. Here's the thing, though. We're talking about the genre in the beginning. The genre came across like it was a rom-com. That's how it opened up. It had light, fluffy music playing. It had him, the characters doing some goofy type stuff as he was doing practice landings and takeoffs and couldn't accomplish it at all. In reality, Doug White had gotten in a lot of hours in his flying, so that was all made up. All this struggle with his brother and his flight instructor was all made up. And it came across goofy. It came across like the opening of a rom-com. It also was promoted as a faith-based film because it was called On a Wing and a Prayer. So, of course, if it's about prayer, why not call it a faith-based film? That makes sense. But it was, for the most part, in the general market, just as a drama. You know, one of the hardest things for a director to do sometimes is to decide, how am I going to approach this story? Here we have a story that's incredibly impactful for the inner life of a man. How do you make that visual? And how can you take advantage of the fact that your entire family is going down in an airplane and you're going to soon crash and die? That's a scary thing. as a director, you don't want to turn around and look for gimmicks and gadgets to try to stick in the story to deal with it. No, you want to look at the real truth of the matter, the humanity of it, what the human condition looks like under those circumstances. That's where the growth comes from in the character, and that's what the audience is always going to admire. But before I say anything more, let me show you a little bit of a clip here. So picture this with goofy type music going on like an opening rom-com, and you even get the special effects where the plane is bouncing up and down, and his brother here is joking and yucking it up. The instructor is trying to be more balanced and help him to understand. And here's the Doug White character that's just not being able to handle the situation. Okay, again, the real Doug White, this is not an issue. So this is made up to try to kick things off. But instead of kicking it off as a drama, it's kicking it off as a silly piece. The opener is just like a rom-com. As a matter of fact, the scenes right after this is at a barbecue where they're doing some goofy stuff as well. So you actually think you're watching a rom-com and you're wondering, is this thing really supposed to be a story where there's grave, extenuating circumstances that they have to somehow overcome to survive? It doesn't seem like it. It just doesn't fit. The genre was a poor choice, and I think the director should have made a significant change in that manner. So let's go on to another aspect, the special effects. Now, you saw the fact that we were able to zoom in and see the plane as it's bobbing and weaving and pulling in so you can see the people in the plane and so on. Well, throughout the show, you can see some elements of the green screen that wasn't taken care of properly. In fact, here's a little bit of a clip here. Let's see if you can detect any green. But again, here with the camera moving in like this and showing you different aspects of what's happening in the cockpit and so on, it's kind of a nice transition piece. But they use it over and over and over and over, and it's not that good of an effect to keep on using, especially when the story is about the human condition in a tragedy type situation. So I think they just went overboard. They got too excited. And what the director really needed to do was look at every one of those special effects shots. Oh, and yes, you hear the sirens. Today's a beautiful day. I have the windows open. Sorry about that. When you're looking at special effects, you have to ask yourself, does it advance the story? If it doesn't advance the story, you got to get rid of it. Now, if you watch Charlie's Angels or Mission Impossible, you've seen this camera work before on a plane situation where the camera comes zooming in and goes into the window of the plane and is now inside. If you've seen the other Mission Impossible things, you've seen them do that with a moving train as well. The fact is, we all know the effect is there, and it makes for a great transition. Now, it could be more than just a transition, because toward the end, when there's this big storm scene, you could be inside and see the shock on the actor's face, and it's like, oh no. And you can pull back and realize, okay, the plane's starting to bounce. It's getting too much turmoil, turbulence. And all of a sudden you pull back more and you see these huge storm clouds. Okay, I could see where that would be a great way to take from that inner fear to demonstrate the visual fear as well. But again, that's one shot. That's not a gazillion shots throughout the whole movie where you're constantly using the same effect over and over and over. I think sometimes we lose track of, do we as directors want to make sure that the effect is serving us and serving our story? Or are we just excited about some cool effect and we're doing it over and over and it's not really helping at all? Enough said about that. Okay, on to the comic relief. Now, comic relief has become really popular ever since R2-D2 and C-3PO showed up, because they were kind of the first cling and clang type effect where you could take a breather from the high adventure and action that's going on, and you could actually just watch a couple little goofy moments with cling and clang, or in this case R2-D2 and C-3PO. And by the way, Cling and Clang was from the childhood television series I used to watch. Now, in this case, instead of it being comic relief, although it sort of is sometimes, it does give you a breather, not really comedic breather, but a breather from the intensity of the rescue story. However, Sean decided here to use it to educate the people. Now, I say Sean, it might have just been the screenwriter, but here's the thing, the director has final say. So when we're talking about final say, if you have a screenplay where you cut away to these two kids, and the one kid is smart because their dad knows how to use certain equipment and so on, and she's going to teach this other boy what's really going on with this whole rescue situation. It's okay to kind of educate the younger audience, but in this movie, every time she points something out, it was either already pointed out in a different scene by the professionals, or it was about to be talked about by the professionals. So the scenes are completely redundant. I have a little bit of a clip here I can show you to give you an idea of kind of what it looks like. She calls her neighbor friend over. He comes in. Hey, what's going on with this rescue stuff? You know, is there a problem? Can I help? And she starts to tell him about how the equipment works and how you can track a plane that's having problems. And we learn different things. We learn how air flows across the wings of an airplane to keep it up in the air. I mean, there's several different lessons during this show. And the audience doesn't really want to be preached at with a bunch of mechanical information about airplanes. What they want to know is what's going on with the family. How are they overcoming this human condition and this peril of being in a plane that's on its way down? That's what the audience wants to see. The audience does not want to learn the technology and the techniques that actual airplane pilots and engineers use to keep a plane up. Now, I think we've all probably have flown the plane at one point or another, not in the pilot seat, but we've all flown, and we kind of know what turbulence feels like, and we know what safe landings feel like, and I think we have enough information that we can picture what the peril actually is. So as a director, if there's such redundancy in the story, that should be a red flag, and the director should be able to say, okay, writer, let's talk this through. You know, let's turn these guys actually into comic relief instead of educational moments, or let's get rid of them. Now, here's one other aspect of these kids. You know, when you got these kids that are constantly being cut away to, you're counting on the fact that there has to be something more to the story. It's a subplot that has to go somewhere. And where it has to go is that somehow it has to tie in to them doing something or bringing a certain piece of information to a certain person. Something has to happen to help aid in the rescue of the airplane so it doesn't crash. But it goes nowhere. There is no beginning, middle, and an end to why these kids are doing this. There's just a lot of middle. Just educate. Not sure why that whole thing started. Not sure that there ever was a conclusion to this relational situation with the girl teaching the guy how things worked. So if it doesn't really help and add to the story's conclusion, you gotta change it. You have to change it. And by not changing it, you're putting your show at risk. Okay, let's talk about a subplot. Now, in the subplot situation, we have probably what I'll call the strongest emotional content. This guy is one of the few pilots that know exactly how to fly the plane that these folks are in, and he can create the answer, but he's got to be able to visualize the board to tell them what buttons to push and where they're located and so on. So he's got this map that actually is a picture, a life-size picture of the cockpit itself. And he's got a girlfriend that they've been struggling with relationships. And she decides she's going to build him a physical cockpit so they could work together and help save this family. And as a result, he finally opens up about what's going on in his life and why he was, holding back from their relationship. And suddenly we realize that, oh my gosh, in this subplot is a far stronger story than what played out in the rest of this film. And why? It's because this character, played by Metcalf, was actually the strongest character in the film. Now, keep in mind, the Doug White character should have been the strongest character because the whole story is about him. Every character should do whatever they do to reveal more about Doug White and to reveal the complex situation or what he's facing or the obstacles that he has to break through or the inner turmoil that he has to somehow find out how to live with. Every character should reveal something about the Doug White character. And that doesn't happen in this film. As a result, Metcalf's character actually becomes probably the most visually stimulating and powerful character because we watch him have reservations about helping because he had lost some family members to the same situation in the past, to overcoming it and deciding to make a difference this time around. And as a result, he opens his heart again, and his girlfriend and him connect really well, and they work together as a team to get the answers to Doug White. Wow. If I find that I'm in a situation where my secondary character is coming across more powerful than my primary character, re-edit the show. Do something different. Now, I don't know what happened on the set or how they interpreted the screenplay or why the one relationship was played up more powerfully than the other. Don't know that. But I do know there's a red flag there. Another red flag that's similar that a lot of directors face is they'll have the story will be about so-and-so, the John Doe story. And they find that the story is really kind of cool, but John Doe's only in 70% of the film. It's like, wait a second, it's the John Doe story. He should be in 98% of the film, maybe 100. As a director, we have to flag that. We have to realize something's wrong here. We need something to change. The director has to initiate that change. One of the first things to check for is the main character passive or assertive? Well, the way it opened up in the rom-com style with the Arab flight that was wonky and the barbecue competition that also was kind of wonky, the main character did not drive any of those scenes. All those scenes happened to him. Well, people want to watch a story where a person takes charge of their own life and they go after something and they clearly make the wrong choice and now have problems to overcome. So they try and make a different choice, which causes more problems. And finally, eventually, we get to the third act and, they finally have the major breakthrough and somehow they've managed to pull it off and their goal has been reached and they were successful. But oh my gosh, they have grown a lot throughout the process of overcoming the obstacles. If your main character is passive, that is a boring show. And you're counting on everybody else taking care of things. Not a good choice. So let's talk about that main character a little bit more. I already said that he started out goofy. Because of his brother dying, he takes on an atheistic approach to life instead of his faith-filled life. And then he gets really, really emotional. Finally, during the terrible worst part of the storm and everything else, he finally says a prayer that is realistic, it's guttural, it's intense. It's like, okay, now it makes sense. It's too bad we didn't have more proactive character in the beginning, but at least at this climactic point, it makes sense. But again, it makes sense for a faith-based film, which it was not promoted as a faith-based film. So, are you doing a disservice to your audience by not letting them know up front that this is all about faith? Don't know. Here's the thing. What we as people want as an audience is we want to know, how did he deal with his inner conflict? We could tell he had an inner conflict because of some of the things he did outside of himself. But we didn't really see the director express the different viewpoints and vantage points of what does it look like when someone is suffering internally and how does he deal with things. We didn't see him say, let's explore the human condition and find out what happens to a person of faith when all of a sudden they now act and live as if they're an atheist. What happens during that time? What is their life so much? I don't even know how to explore it myself because I can't comprehend the crisis inside of a person when they've lived this way all their life or whatever period of time it was for. And now all of a sudden they're going to live this way because something didn't go their way. How can you even change your thought process that fast just because your brother dies? Clearly, he must have blamed God or must have, I believe, I don't remember correctly, but I think in true life, his father died a few months earlier. So it was like two major deaths back to back. I could see where that would cause someone to question things, no doubt. But if you've had this faith life, you would think that he would know how to think through the process or at least find a process to work through. But in this film, we just see the outside effects of it, and we don't really see him struggle with how to deal with it or how to face it or what to do with it. In fact, the things outside of him that all happen to him instead of things happening because he's making a whole bunch of choices based on this crisis, all these exterior things, none of them happened in real life. Like the big, huge storm that's tossing the plane around. When the family actually had that real crisis, they had blue skies for miles and miles and miles. There was no storm. It was perfect conditions. The turbulence they're talking about and bouncing around and he's having a hard time maintaining the flight. No turbulence when the real family went through the crisis. So the director really missed the fact that the crisis was an internal one that he had to also resolve based on how he was now impacting his external life. To me, that's an incredible story that I want to see. What I saw, not so much. It almost was like it was a film tried to make for an adult, but it wasn't sophisticated enough, so they rearranged it a little bit and made it more kid-like so they could call it a family film. It was missing the heart of the real essence of what the real life Doug White actually went through. So it's one of those tough things. But from a main character standpoint, I'm going to just show you a little bit of this. This is where this big storm has come up. And again, we got this effect where we're moving in and out of the airplane. And you can tell that they are getting into this incredibly intense, severe storm with lightning and so on. And it gets to the point where the external is so strong here in this moment, he now says a prayer, and it's a guttural prayer. And it really worked well. It just wasn't real because that's not what happened on the actual flight. Now, there's another scene, too, where the mom is in the back with the two girls, and they decide to pray. And their prayers were not that guttural, heartfelt, desperate for life type prayers. They actually were more, well, they said the Lord's Prayer at one time. And so it was more a reciting of prayers, which doesn't really show the depth of the fear and panic that was going on in the kids. In real life, if I recall the story properly, the one girl was so intensely upset that she vomited. You don't see that in the film. So when you have that kind of emotional strain because your heart is crying out for safety, love, and life, and externally in real life everything was calm and plain, the airplane was flying well, the blue skies, no turbulence. Oh my gosh, what a huge contrast to how do you deal with this perfect physical condition while emotionally you are a wreck, wanting to know how you're going to survive this. That's a tough thing. Now, they did touch on a couple things in the film that were real, due to the fact that this was a unique airplane and the father did not have enough hours in flying. They gave the family only a 10% chance of surviving. That part was true. I don't know what it would be like for you, but if I suddenly found myself flying a plane just after my brother's, funeral, and the pilot is lying dead in the chair next to me, that would be a really intense story. But you don't get that kind of intensity. You just get bigger and different things like the storm and stuff like that. So if you look at what the critics said, the critics all panned this film. And I really believe that the main reason it was panned is because in the beginning, the director makes you think you're about to watch a rom-com and a goofy comedy for the family. And then lo and behold, no, it's actually supposed to be an intense drama. So you realize, okay, this is actually a deep inner story, kind of like Clint Eastwood's $1 Million Baby. That you got to really deal with those internal issues first before you can face that external obstacle. But that's not what they did here. Instead of dealing with the internal, they put external obstacle on top of obstacle on top of obstacle on top of obstacle. And they just kept on piling it up until they had this huge, massive storm where it was certain death. And then they turned the planes, and suddenly they have blue skies and an easy runway to land on. It was it was interesting. So I hope that I've given you a little bit to think about as far as how to address the film. Please watch On a Wing and a Prayer, because I would love to hear from you to see if you think if I got the key points right as far as what went wrong with this particular film. Let me know. Write it in the comments. Until next time, have a great one and see you at the movies.